Hello. Hey,
Oh,
Tushio.
Hadi.
Long time, man. Long time
It's
no
been such
see.
a
Yeah,
been a while.
yeah.
How are you doing?
Last, good. Yeah, well, relatively speaking, I'm in grad school. What does good mean? How are you? How's your little one?
Oh, he's doing good. He's a bit
Oh,
he's
man.
not very happy today for some reason. So
He
we're
wants you. He's like, too many meetings, man. Like, I need love and affection, and okay, that's great. That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. How's the roundtables been so far? I mean, you had to be in every one of them, right?
Yeah, I've been on everyone. Yeah, they've been pretty excellent, I think. They've been
Okay, good.
yeah, there's been a lot of
Yeah,
great stuff happening. So
good. So
yeah.
today I'm just gonna do something to lower your expectations for tomorrow. How's that?
You're gonna be great. I know it. I
I
know it.
yeah.
Oh, Hadi, are you gonna share your screen at all or
I
play
don't think
video?
so. I
Okay.
don't think so.
Okay.
Actually, Tushio, I have stuff written, but I think, and I'm pretty much hope I'm gonna stay like around less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
I gave my stuff to a software and it says the reading time, like
Yeah.
the speaking time
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be around 6 minutes, but
Okay.
then I'm just gonna really talk a lot, which I hope you haven't forgotten that about me.
We're looking
Oh,
forward to it, actually.
yeah, thank
Oh,
you. Hi,
Hello.
Amira.
hello.
Hello. Hi, Hadi. Hi, Megan.
Hi, how are you?
Toshio, sorry. I saw one name on a screen and I'm looking at another face.
Before too many people get in the room, we realized
Mhm.
that we didn't talk about an order. Amira, how do you feel about starting it off? Are you okay with that? Maybe Hadi, would you go second? Would that be?
I mean, I don't want to start because then everybody will have like a very disappointing start to the roundtable.
Hardly.
I also don't want to end the roundtable. Just like really don't know. Everywhere in the between would be just fine.
Well, how about what I would propose is Amira and then Hadi and then maybe Emily and then Ellen, or Ellen, Emily. We'll see. You're all going to be great. So there's no, it'll be fine.
Good.
Is
I'm
it
okay.
possible to test slides? Is that okay?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You should be able to share, right? I think.
Yes, I think.
Okay.
Oh, I'm not a co-host. Oh, but I guess I can share anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You should be able to share.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I'll just check this. And yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Amira, do you have any like video in your slides? Okay. Just making sure.
No video.
Okay.
I do have, I was going to state a land acknowledgement at the top, and then there's a land acknowledgement that's put out by the local Puyallup Tribe of Indians in Toloshootseed and English. And so it is a YouTube link. So I was wondering if I could just paste it in the chat because there's a land acknowledgement already created.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I was planning on giving a land acknowledgement right at the top of the whole thing as well.
Yeah.
So.
But mine is.
Are you thinking of doing? Sure. Perfect.
Just because I'm checking in from elsewhere.
Yes. No. That's fine. That's fine. I'm trying to make mine as kind of widespread, acknowledging the Zoom platform. But no, I think that's great. That's perfect.
I also have my own thing, if it's okay. It's
Yes.
short. It's like 3 lines or something, which is the official one that the Council of Elders at U of T sort of.
Yeah, no problem.
How has the conference been going?
Great so far. Yeah, yesterday was excellent, and I haven't been able to get to too many of the CSTM events. Just it's such terrible, like the time zone is just so difficult. So everything is starting in Newfoundland at like starting at 8:30, and I just can't. I can't do the super. To me, that's 8:30 is not super late. That sounds so lame, but but it gets a little bit late when things are starting at that time. So. It's very exciting. I'm hoping to get to some of the other things in the next few days.
I also haven't been to, and mostly because I cannot figure the time. Like honestly, I only realized our roundtable is at 1 and not 2 because I made the mistake yesterday. So I arrived at the roundtable yesterday with an hour of delay, and I was like, okay, thank God. You know, it's like after almost 8 years, time zones remain the thing that I cannot figure out. Like every time I have to search, like what is EST, what is, you know, like it just doesn't sit on my mind for some reason.
Well, and this time of year is so difficult, right? With the time, like, you know, the daylight savings and everything. Yeah. I had that happen the other day. One of our students is in Kenya, and so I was having a meeting with him, and it was supposed to be at 2:30 our time, but at like, I think it was 1:20, I got this email that popped up saying so-and-so is waiting, is in your waiting room. Like, no. So needless to say, I hadn't prepared.
Yeah.
So,
Oh
well.
You know, the thing that the first time I was really shocked about this time difference was that in Newfoundland, I would be just like sitting in like around noon or even afternoon, and then I saw like children's programming in like TV, or was just like late in the night, and I was like, what's that? Like it's like 9 p.m. Why there's children programming? I was like, oh yeah, you know, somewhere else it's still like 3 p.m. or something. But sorry.
And the half an hour always throws people off. Hi, Monique.
Hi, Monique.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Amira, are you getting these? Are you affected by all this big storm? Are you guys in the storm area?
Not really. It's just been pretty windy, mostly rain, but that's normal for here. Yeah, I'm not really.
Pretty windy and rainy would be a slow Tuesday in St. John's.
Yeah. Yeah, another day. Actually, it's been great here. It's been like plus 10, 12, sunny. Can't complain about that. But I say that now, and it's going to be terrible for days. But.
Are you going to be introducing, or should we do like a tag team introduction? Like, should I be introducing the next person, kind of thing? I think they call that.
I thought I would. I'm going to do like a kind of an overview introduction, and I thought I would introduce each person right at the beginning, and then yeah, maybe you can just say, I'll pass it over to Hadi or something like that. I don't know that I need to really step in to moderate that part. So yeah, go ahead if you're okay with that. Hopefully we can get Emily and Ellen.
Yeah, I'm sending them a reminder now just so that they can.
The one thing I found yesterday is that, you know, you kind of start the discussion and then the time is up. So the more time for, I think we'll have plenty of time today for discussion, which would be really nice. Don't you always feel these things that like the conversation just starts and then it's the time is up.
I think my discussion, were you guys there when I said it? I
Yes,
think
yes.
my discussion would be under 10 minutes. I don't think I have that much to say, but then again, I might just like really improvise. I'll try not to improvise, but hopefully
Okay,
I'll be less than 10 minutes, so that gives us some free room.
no
Oh,
problem.
there's Emily.
Great.
Oh,
Bev.
Ellen's in too.
Hi there.
Hi, Bev.
Hello.
Hi, Bev.
Hi, Hadi. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, everybody.
Give folks another minute or so to settle in.
I've been wondering why the word for going on Zoom is to hop. You know, this, hopping on a Zoom call, hopping off a Zoom call. I feel like if I actually did that, that'd probably be pretty good for me.
I didn't even know that was the word. Problems of being retired. You just don't know the language anymore.
Although I'm sure you've been on your fair share of Zoom calls in the last couple of years.
Well, yes.
Well, maybe I'll get started with a little introduction. So welcome everyone to the Dialogues Roundtable on Anti-Racist Music Pedagogy and Ethnomusicology. This event is held in conjunction with the annual meeting of the Canadian Society for Traditional Music. My name is Megan Forsyth, and I'll be moderating this session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands on which we are gathered today. While we meet today on Zoom, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility to improving relationships with nations and to improving our own understandings of and relationships with local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast here in Canada, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this place home. I ask us all to reflect on the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of true reconciliation and collaboration. So this dialogue series is one initiative of a broader project entitled Dialogues Decolonizing Sound, Music, and Dance Studies, which is funded by the SSHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And the project is facilitated through a partnership between the International Council for Traditional Music, ICTM, and CSTM, with the huge support of the Center for Sound Communities at Cape Breton University, as well as the collaboration of numerous international scholars and students. So I'd like to also thank the University of Alberta for hosting this year's virtual CSTM conference, and particularly the co-chairs, Dr. Julia Bile and Dr. Daniel Akira Stadnicki. And my thanks also to my partner in crime here, Toshio Oki, who helped organize today's events and is controlling the technical aspects of this series. So thanks, Toshio, for everything you've done. In this four-part roundtable workshop series, presenters have been discussing various aspects and strategies that foster decolonization and anti-racism in classroom and non-classroom settings. So this is the second of the two roundtables entitled Starting with the Syllabus, and the last of this four-part series. And today's roundtable focuses on anti-racist strategies and modalities in the classroom, particularly in the context of courses like Introduction to World Music or Music of the World's Peoples, courses that are often assigned to ethnomusicologists in North American post-secondary institutions and which have long held colonial residues. So I'd like to welcome our panelists today and to all of you who are joining us. Our panelists will talk about their experiences developing and giving assignments and classroom activities, and perhaps provide suggestions for thinking about this in the future. Our panelists today include Dr. Ameera Nimjee, who is assistant professor in the School of Music at the University of Puget Sound. Hadi Milanloo, who is a PhD candidate in ethnomusicology at the University of Toronto. Dr. Yun and Emily Wang is assistant professor of music and gender, sexuality, and feminist studies at Duke University. And Dr. Ellen Waterman is the Helmut Kalman Chair for Music in Canada, Professor of Music, and Director of the newly formed Music, Sound, and Society in Canada Research Center at Carleton University. This roundtable will consist of presentations of about 15 minutes, followed by open discussion. So without further ado, I'd invite Dr. Nimjee to open our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all who are here. And thank you especially to Megan and Toshio for everything you've done, for inviting me to present here, for inviting me to participate. And I also thank my colleagues who presented yesterday. I'm so sorry I was unable to be there. I was teaching, and I look forward to catching up and sort of thinking about this conversation in dialogue with yesterday's conversation. So if you just bear with me for one moment, I'd like to share some slides, and then I'll go ahead and get started. If I can just get a thumbs up that you can see my slides, okay? Great, thank you. All right, so today I'm checking in from the land of the Lushootseed speaking peoples, past and present, whose stewardship of this region of Turtle Island, its waterways, mountains, animals, and plants continue to this present day. I acknowledge the Puyallup tribe of Indians in particular, and they work very much to revitalize the Lushootseed language in the Puget Sound region. And I'd be happy to share this fantastic bilingual video, land acknowledgement in Lushootseed in English, that is put out by the Puyallup tribe for sharing. My name is Ameera Nimjee, and I teach ethnomusicology in the School of Music and in Asian Studies at the University of Puget Sound. As I'm sure I share with many of you, I am my institution's only ethnomusicologist and a rather recent hire who is responsible for teaching essentially the non-West in the School of Music. As I'm sure I also share with some, I represent another few firsts and onlys among my colleagues. I'm the first woman of color, first person of color, hired as a full-time faculty member in music. I am the second faculty member at my entire institution to teach courses on South Asia, and the only Muslim faculty member at my university at large. And I say this to emphasize that my approach today to anti-racism in the classroom is intertwined with my desire to diversify conceptions of anti-racism and decolonization, moving past what have been dominantly American approaches to encourage students to participate in larger global dialogues in this area. So I'd like to just give a sense of the courses I teach. I teach 6 courses per year at the University of Puget Sound, and these are Women in Music, Music of the World's Peoples, which Megan said, of course, is the bread and butter, or perhaps dal chawal of the ethnomusicologist course load. I do teach an Introduction to Ethnomusicology Methods course, a Music of South Asia course, Dance and World Cultures course, and a recent course that I've added just this year, which is called Performing Asian America. And as I'm sure we all do in our classes, I revisit these syllabi each time I teach them, adding pertinent case studies around germane current events, replacing course texts with the newest award-winning pieces of scholarship in these disciplines, many from whom are in this room today. And of course, routinely ensuring that I work with a variety of authors and media, not just in the form of texts, but podcast episodes, YouTube videos, comedy specials, TikToks, and even Reddit forums. And I do this not just to provincialize voices that have been overrepresented in the academic canon, but also to acknowledge that publication avenues are still very fraught in academia and that scholarship exists in a plurality of places. As per this roundtable's ask, I'd like to present 3 classroom and course assignments that ask students to engage in global dialogues around decolonization and anti-racism. So these are in 3 separate courses, and I'll explain each in sequence. So the first course, Women in Music, is a course in the art core, meaning that it is open to any and all students at my university who are looking to fulfill this requirement in a sort of campus-wide liberal arts curriculum. It is mandatory for every single student on campus to take what's called an artistic approaches core. And this is one of the options. I often joke with the students when they first come to class that, you know, they'll be expecting that we discuss their favorite American recording artists, perhaps Billie Eilish, Megan Thee Stallion, Taylor Swift, Olivia Rodrigo, Doja Cat, and so many others. And these folks never actually make it to the syllabus. Instead, I seek to widen the students' perspectives on what is meant by both the category women and in music. So we discuss DJs and producers, transgender culture bearers of Indian folk dance, for example, women music critics, and as always, a requisite unit on Muslim feminisms. So in this assignment, I do assign the first 10 pages of this book, Sabah Mahmood's The Politics of Piety, which I will say undergraduate students do struggle with and struggle through as they grapple with unlearning notions of agency as contained in the actions of the quote, liberal individual. This semester, I paired Mahmood with a chapter from the book Siren Song by Fawzia Afzal Khan, who presents actually a rebuttal to Mahmood. And I do so in emphasizing to the students the multiplicity of perspectives on Muslim feminism, presenting a Muslim feminisms rather than just Muslim feminism. The resulting class assignment is an in-class assignment and is a research assignment of sorts, which I title Performing Muslim Womanhood. And this is conducted in groups with the objective of having students locate Muslim musicians whose womanhood is part of the work they do in the world. Often, this results in opening the students' minds into a space in which the term Muslim, woman, and performance coexist in a plurality of Muslim femininity and perhaps feminism. I usually give students 45 minutes or so with this assignment in which the final form, and I'll explain the instruction here, is a collaborative group slide. First, as a group, the students must locate a musician or performer whose identity as a Muslim woman is presented as central to their work. They are directed to use popular media outlets like Billboard, Pitchfork, Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music, and of course, Google. Their collaborative slide must consist of a few bullet points that answer the question, what does the musician's music sound or feel like? How might it relate to some of the music we've studied in class? And of course, how does Muslim womanhood figure into their music? In addition to these written points, the slide must also include a link to a representative track or performance, and usually a spokesperson from the group must be prepared to present the slide in the next class session. And past examples of musicians in this assignment have included folks like Pakistani Qawwal, Abida Parveen, of course, Egypt's fourth pyramid, the late Kulthum, Pakistani-American singer-songwriter Arooj Aftab, the UK-based rap duo Poetic Pilgrimage, and Malaysian musician Yuna. And these are just some examples that students have found, and this list constantly grows and widens and shrinks and moves every time I assign this particular assignment. So I'll move on to another course and another assignment as opposed to my Women in Music course. Music of South Asia is an upper level undergraduate seminar in which I present some of the interrelated traditions of music, dance, and theater from the South Asian subcontinent and its diasporas. I try my best to really decenter India in this course, focusing on studies from Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and the Indo-Caribbean, for example, highlighting twice migrant communities who have migrated for indenture and been dispersed from the labor diaspora for the last several hundred years. I also try to bring to the fore crucial current events, for example, musical protest around the government coup in Myanmar, the Rohingya migrant crisis in northeastern South Asia, the reestablishment of the Taliban government in Afghanistan, and of course, which will be the focus of this assignment, Dalit liberation from the shackles of caste in India. So the second assignment is a course assignment, and it is usually worth 10% of a student's grade, in which they pair up to create a photo essay from among Instagram posts that highlight significant voices in the Dalit liberation movement. Here, I seek to have students research and understand the movement from among the on-the-ground leaders who are pushing the movement forward on social media. This is a conversation and a movement that is already happening and often takes some lag time to be pushed into the academic discourse. So I have students work very much on social media here. As I'll explain, the students are first asked to locate Instagram accounts that contribute to the dialogue on the consequences of caste violence and Dalit liberation. And I always say to students that as Instagram users themselves, I've never actually had a situation in a class where a student doesn't have an Instagram account and actively use the platform. So I always say that as Instagram users, students are the most equipped to research and find this information and create networks of accounts quickly using hashtags and kind of falling down the rabbit hole of posts and reposts in the content of the accounts they already follow. Following this initial research, students must then create a photo essay of 10 Instagram posts, and these are accompanied by a 150 word annotation each that explicate a theme or focus. The whole assignment must be preceded by a 350 word introduction that describes the focus or theme within the Dalit liberation movement, and some sub-themes, of course, include things like Dalit trans advocacy or changing legislation, for example. One that just came out today, which is a wonderful win, as UC Berkeley joined, I think, a list of 4 universities thus far in the United States that have accepted Dalit discrimination as a protected discriminating category. So in this introduction, I also ask students not just to explicate their theme, their sub-theme, but also explaining the research process and what it took to compile the essay. So here are just a few examples. I'll be assigning this next semester in my Music of South Asia course, but just a few examples of what the Instagram posts might look like. I draw specifically here from 2 accounts. You can see the handles both in the caption and at the top of each screen grab. 2 accounts include Equality Labs and Dalit Viva. And this resulting assignment must include, of course, this is just partial for you, but include introductory and annotation text, and then can be represented in whatever form the students choose. And in the past, students have done, slide decks for each photo, or a slide for each photo, and the whole thing represented in a slide deck, something as simple as a Word doc, a spreadsheet, or in the past, students have created their own websites. And with the Google Suite, we have so much access to sort of design that's built in for students to be able to access this relatively easily. So the last assignment that I will explain does return to the in-class format. And I just assigned this yesterday, so our reflections are pretty fresh. And this is in my course, Dance and World Cultures. And so the course is also an upper level undergraduate seminar, but it is similar to a music of the world kind of course, our bread and butter, right, as ethnomusicologists. And here I introduce students to global dance traditions, placing them in their social, cultural, and political, of course, contexts. I should also say here that I am myself a Kathak dancer, and as a result, do my best to teach spaces between music and dance as continuous, such that the two are inseparable realms of aesthetic practice. So in all of my classes this week, the week of the Thanksgiving holiday here in the United States, I assigned an episode from the podcast, All My Relations, and here is the podcast banner at the bottom. And this is a podcast that's hosted by Matika Wilberg and Adrian Keene. The podcast episode titled Thanks-Taking or Thanksgiving is one in which the hosts converse with Wampanoag scholars Paula Peters and Linda Coombs to, in their own words, tell the real story of Thanksgiving and the complex history undergirding this event in relation to Indigenous people. I paired this podcast in all of my courses with a discussion of Indigenous sovereignty. And these courses that I assigned this week, or at least the courses I teach this semester, are Women in Music, which you've heard about, Dance and World Cultures, which I'll explain a little bit now, and then Performing Asian America. And this course, Asian America, I did assign a book called Unsettled Solidarities on the kind of crucial aspect of not conflating the process of racializing Asian Americans with the experiences of Indigenous communities throughout the Americas. So not just North America, but South America and the Caribbean as well. And I'd be happy to share the link to the book in the chat. I think it was a fantastic assignment. But to move on from just this, this discussion on Thanksgiving, in Dance and World Cultures, I paired this podcast as a precursor to an in-class assignment, which contextualized sovereign movements. And I will explain why this is in italics just now. The objective of this assignment was to connect larger continuing movements in Indigenous sovereignty as located in practices of dance. And here, the assignment revolved around a 2019 special issue of the journal Movement Research Performance Journal, titled Sovereign Movements, Native Dance and Performance. So what you see here is the cover of the journal issue on the left and a partial screen grab of its table of contents. I know they're tiny, but I'm happy to direct you in a link in the chat to the journal issue. And so this table of contents, like I said, is partial. The entirety of the table of contents features about 30 entries and pieces in the form of short essays, poetry, photographs, interviews, and dialogues on dance, movement, and sovereignty. So before my Dance and World Cultures my class met yesterday, I asked the students to select 3 of these pieces from the issue, read them, and come to class with a sense of the term Indigenous sovereignty. In class, to be able to kind of process and get a sense of what they all read and how they could sort of understand that, I distributed a worksheet in class with the following instructions to help contour our discussion of Indigenous sovereignty as expressed through movement and dance. First, students reflected and wrote independently on one of the pieces they read from the special issue. They then shared their points on their selected piece with a partner who took notes on what was shared with them. So the students are kind of hearing from their partners and writing these things down. Finally, students returned to independent writing on what is meant by the term sovereign movements, following which we discussed their reflections as a larger group. And given that this assignment happened yesterday, I'd like to share some of these reflections here today. Some really interesting ones that took place in class. So the ending discussion that we had as a group was sort of prompted by what are sovereign movements? So for one student, Sovereign movements are a constant awareness of and connection to the body as related to connection with the land. And this came from a particular piece that the student read, in which this was kind of the main thrust of the piece. And in each case, I've shared the piece name so you can cross compare with the table of contents of the journal issue if you're interested. For another student, sovereign movements are the right to autonomously choreograph the Indigenous body through space. A few students picked up on the idea of space and dance taking up space, wherein Indigenous dancers reclaim practices of dance that had been banned as legislated in the Indian Act. Lastly, a student made connections with defining the ritual of harvesting salmon as a sovereign movement and form of dance. So I end here, my remarks here on Indigenous sovereignty as a method that addresses the specificity of what decolonization means in an American context. That said, my 3 assignments are on sovereign movements, locating Dalit liberation, and performing Muslim womanhood as just some of the approaches in, for me, what is an evolving framework for encouraging students to think in global contexts about anti-racism in the university classroom. So I look forward to learning more from my colleagues today and to our larger discussion. And I'd like now to pass it over to my dear colleague and friend, Hadi Milanloo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amira. Thank you very much for a talk. As always, amazing, very, very thought-provoking. I appreciate that. امروز من به عنوان میهمانی ناخوانده در موتن مردمان پتون فرست نیشن، سنکا و میسیساگای رودخانه کردیت با شما صحبت میکنم. کلام را با سلام بدین مردمان آغاز میکنم، به رفتگان، باشندگان و نامدگانشان. قدردان آنم که در سرزمینشان سخاوتمندانه میزبان منند. Today, I talk to you as an uninvited guest in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Ptun First Nation, the Seneca and the Mississauga of the Credit River. I begin by honoring these people, past and present, and offering my gratitude for having the opportunity to live and work on this territory. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me in this roundtable. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you, although I'm really not sure that in this company, if I have anything to contribute. When I was just thinking of what to talk about, it occurred to me that perhaps the best thing that I can do is just to reflect on my experience as a grad student and how I came across different syllabus and in class assignment. But at the same time, it's also about my confusion about this distinction between the syllabus as a space in which we imagine the classroom and then the ways in which we conduct that imagination. We try to achieve that imagination through assignments and activities, so on and so forth. Particularly, I think that the distinction is more clear in undergrad courses, but like in upper and in grad school, the distinction really just like really blurs in. Yeah. So I just thought I talk about one experience and talk about that the blurring of the line between the syllabus as in a space of imagination, as a space for imagining the classroom, and then the ways in which we try to realize that achievement. I've been thinking of the lines that separate two parts of this syllabus workshop, the one that was presented yesterday on what we teach, and the one that we're participating in today, which is about how we teach. I felt talking about a particular class that I took at U of T, at U of T's Women and Gender Studies Institute, could be an interesting opportunity to discuss how to productively blur the lines between the syllabus as the space that imagines the classroom and the ways in which that imagination is actualized through assignments, activities, etc. Put differently, I want to argue how we structure a syllabus is also a part of how we achieve what we imagine in the space of syllabus. I feel it's also necessary to say that I've been, of course, privileged to be in different aspiring classes within ethnomusicology, whether at the U of T or at the Memorial University. However, for the purpose of this talk, I decided to go outside ethnomusicology, as I think it allows us to see a classroom radically, to some extent, different from ours, which might be in turn helpful. In the fall of 2017, in my second year at U of T, I took a course called Feminist Theories, Histories, and Movements at Women and Gender Studies Institute, which I mentioned. It was taught by Professor Milanloo, a Senegalese scholar who completed her education in Senegal, France, and the United States. I took the course hoping that it would contribute to how I imagined my doctoral project, but it inspired me in different ways. Particularly relevant to this workshop is how through her syllabus, she challenged one of the important institutions of power, racial power, I would even say, the white man as the brilliant individual, right? The white man as the person who produces and holds the knowledge individually by himself. Her syllabus and the way she did it in the class, I believe, challenged that notion. Central in Dr. Lowe's course was transnational feminism, an approach known by scholars such as Jackie M. Alexander, Chandra Mohanty, amongst others, or by its strong interest in praxis, the entangling of theory and method, or knowledge and action on the ground. I believe it was Dr. Lowe's understanding of praxis that made her class so effective for me. Her syllabus not only was created to teach transnational feminism because of its, and an approach that because of its emphasis on intersectionality is also inherently anti-racism and anti-colonialism as well. But also that syllabus was structured to practice transnational feminism in the class. So this, again, blurring of the syllabus as a theory and syllabus as action. First and foremost, most sources in her syllabus were the works of women, and particularly women of color. I think out of, there was like a ratio of 5 to 6 women to 1 man in the authors of the sources. And most men in the list of authors, they were like co-writers. I think the only sole men that wrote, we read a piece by Foucault, you know, that sort of people, but other than that. And also the course was also particularly dominated by women of color. So a ratio of 3 to 1 between women of color and white women. So she was making a point in that. In doing so, the syllabus presented women, particularly women of color, as knowledge producers and knowledge holders, a role that traditionally didn't belong to them, it belonged to the white man. At the time, I had already heard ideas about doing a course like that, but Dr. Lowe's course captured my imagination by actually realizing that. Also remember that it was 2017, like Me Too was a new thing still. Sarah Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life was relatively speaking a new publication. So today it doesn't sound like a very unique idea, but in 2007 I had like this wow kind of moment the first day I read her syllabus. She talked about that idea, the first session of the class, making sure that everyone understood that that move as an intervention she's making by that syllabus. So then she actively turned that syllabus into an active part of the classroom. Through that explanation, she turned the syllabus into something she was doing rather than just a roadmap to what she wanted to do. As if she brought it from the outside into the class. You know, this idea of there's a syllabus and there's how we do it. She sort of fused these two together. Secondly, and I thought this was perhaps, the second one is even perhaps more important. Dr. Lowe's syllabus was featured a lot of collaborative works, whether writings or works in other media. Almost 30% of the sources in the course were collaborative. This is important because putting an emphasis on collaborative work is one of the central advocacies of transnational feminism. So this was yet another move in which she turned that advocacy and theory into action. And this is the essence of the praxis, right? Turning, bridging between theory and action. If offering a syllabus dominated by women challenged the position of the white man as the knowledge producer, then featuring collaborative work questions the position of the brilliant individual who produces knowledge. Again, that Amira talked about that liberal individual that Mahmoud criticizes, and I think I'm trying to make a point about that as well. Knowledge production as something you do by yourself. I don't know. While her idea of dedicating the majority of the syllabus space to women, particularly women of color, doesn't sound so groundbreaking anymore, I believe the presence of those collaborative works still has something to teach us. It underlines the importance of collaboration and collaborative work in classroom and more broadly in the field. Before this talk, I checked the articles that 3 of the leading ethnomusicology journals have published in last six years. Each of them averaged slightly over 1 collaborative work per year. So imagine a journal has like 3 issues a year, then only 1 collaborative article. And most of these collaborative articles come in like last year or so. So in which means people are trying to do it, but it hasn't been done yet. And I feel like, speaking of like anti-racism, this position of lone individual as lone knowledge producer, we talk about it, we criticize it, but at the same time, we really don't, we advocate for something that we don't do in this, particularly in the space of a scholarship. And I think it becomes more important in syllabi that become up for like a grad student particularly, because in that context, what is given to a grad student as a syllabus immediately becomes the teacher's in class activity. You know what I mean? It becomes teacher's assignment, because then those students are trained to approach those syllabi critically. And these are the things that I feel become important. The idea that, yeah, I wanna just like probably leave it here by saying, by talking about this, the importance of this collaboration. How do we bring the collaboration into the classroom, and from the classroom into a space of or a scholarship? Because as ethnomusicologists, we do collaboration a lot, but not necessarily in the space of or what we call scholarship, right? So that the question of where we are collaborative and where we are not, how do we bring that question in action to the classroom? I think I want to leave it at that. Yeah, sorry. And I think I'm gonna pass the torch to Ellen.
Thanks, Hadi. Wow. Yeah. So I'm just kind of blown away here, and I know Emily is also going to light us all on fire. I'm so honored to be on this roundtable with Hadi and Emily and Amira, because I know that all this amazing innovative work is coming from young scholars. And I think all I have to offer here today is age. I'm not sure that's much to offer, but I'll give it a go. So I am speaking from the unceded Algonquin territory at Carleton University in Ottawa, and that's happening meaningfully. Building that relationship is happening meaningfully in my institution in some ways that I really appreciate. Through our mainly Indigenous run Carleton Center for Indigenous Initiatives and the anti-racism work there. I'm currently in a course called Kinamagawin Indigenous Learning Certificate. And what I love about it is that it's staff, it's faculty, it's people from across the community. And it's one of those rare spaces where I'm in a course, we have a course that isn't just sort of hived off to one particular area of the university. So I want to point to that learning that goes on throughout our careers. I speak today from, an undoubtedly privileged positionality, right? I'm a white, more or less abled, cisgender settler Canadian with job security. In fact, not just job security, dream job security. I currently teach 2 courses a year, and I get to be a research prof. Like, who knew that would ever happen, right? I don't take any of that lightly. I've also been teaching for about a quarter of a century, and the one thing I know is that learning how to teach never stops. Developing an anti-racist pedagogy is an urgent imperative that's thoroughly entangled with other urgent imperatives: decolonization, disability awareness, gender and sexuality. And one of the profound realities of this work for me is that I don't have access to my racialized students' lived experience. I can only work from a place of humility and openness to learning from them. Tomie Han is helpful in this respect. She writes about the productive state of being disoriented, reoriented, and disoriented again. And this feels true to me in my ongoing efforts to rethink, revise, restructure, and reorient my pedagogy. Another context that's important is that currently I work in a relatively unsiloed and musically diverse setting, where my classes typically include both music students and students from other programs. We have relatively few core courses, and students can kind of find their way through, and almost all our courses are open to students from, our humanities courses are open to students from other programs. And we're certainly not without our problems and limitations, God knows. But we are currently actively reviewing our entire program, both in terms of content and structure. And that's both challenging and encouraging work. It's kind of an amazing time. Things that were unsayable 2 years ago are suddenly on the table, like, should we have auditions? Like deep structural things about how we work. Despite the true difficulties of the pandemic and adjusting to online teaching, I want to talk about my efforts to disorient and reorient the Music in Canada course at Carleton last winter. The online context matters because it actually enabled a certain kind of approach to assignments and to interacting with students. And to be clear, I'm not holding this course up as any kind of model for anti-racist pedagogy. It's one step in an ongoing process. My first thought in structuring the course was to abandon any sort of attempt at linear history in favor of a thematic approach. There's just no way to tell the history of music in Canada without sidelining all kinds of important groups of people and pinning them in historical moments in time that in ways that are problematic. At least I haven't found a way to do that. So the thematic approach allowed me to foreground critical readings, listening, and viewing that emphasized Indigenous and Black and other racialized artists and scholars. For example, we read work by Ronaldo Walcott, Leanne Betasomasaki Simpson, Sadie Buck, Mark Campbell, and Nancy Yunhua Rowe. We put a lot of critical pressure on the idea of Canada and on the other themes in the course. So here's what the themes were: indigeneity, and this is in the order that we laid them out. So indigeneity, settler colonialism, the idea of North, nation, diasporic consciousness, multiculturalism, everyday life, environment, festivals, and music in times of crisis. As the syllabus stated, we'll discuss the course materials each week, but class meetings will not simply repeat the recorded lectures. Instead, the majority of the time will be devoted to group listening and viewing and small group discussion on a broad range of topics related to music in Canada. Students will have input into these discussion topics. Although we will look at some important historical developments in music in Canada, this is not a history course. Instead, the course is organized around topics that will encourage us to take a critical approach both to music and to various narratives of national identity. So I divided the class of 50 into 2 groups, and I did these short, very short, I know we all did this, right? Coping with online stuff. I made these short podcasty kinds of lectures, mainly audio, once in a while video, but mainly audio, because I just think there's so much time on screen looking at screen that just trying to get away from that fatigue. So each week, students had the opportunity to meet for an hour in those small groups just for discussion, and we would typically have some kind of focus, a piece of music we all listened to, or a really short bit of writing that we could break up into groups and talk about and come back to the whole. So it was all about doing something together in class. And then the other thing that I found really useful, and this is not innovative at all, but the online forums that one has in course platforms, this was really amazing space for students. And I think particularly at that moment in the pandemic, when people were pretty fatigued, and when you're teaching, you're looking at a bunch of black squares most of the time, right, with people's names on them. That in these forums, I would give just a piece of music, a small bit of writing, a very simple prompt that did not ask people to react in any particular way, but simply to reflect on their connections they might be making between a couple of items or just on an item. And students responded amazingly. It's the sort of thing where once you post your comment, you can see all the other students' comments, and then you can engage with them. And what really struck me was how generous and vulnerable and critical they were, of their own positionalities or experience or awakening understanding of various things, the generosity in sharing with one another, and the urge to do so, alongside an intense grief that many students expressed for the loss of an idea of Canada that they grew up with as a good place where soldiers were peacekeepers, and there wasn't slavery, and we were healing in relations with Indigenous people. So finding out the realities of those histories or situations, and reading and hearing them from those people was really clarifying for some, oddly shocking for others. It was like halfway through the course when a white student in the class discussion said, "Tragically hip, Canada's banned, they're all white men." And yeah, but what was wonderful was the student was coming to this idea and stating it as their own in that moment, and having some thoughts about it, right? That I tried really hard not to coerce, which I think is hard not to do in any kind of thematic course, right? So how to provide prompts and ideas, but not to steer the outcomes of them. Students also handed in a number of short critical reading reflections, but they could choose from among the reading list, and they had quite a bit of agency on which of those reflections were graded. And then another helpful strategy was to always give students the choice in a major assignment to do a research creation project with a critical written reflection. I've done a lot of that kind of active creative work with students over my career, but I'm increasingly thinking that this is a path I want to explore deeply. I'm giving a class next semester that is really based on research creation, because I think that my experience, students that take this option, they surprise me, they surprise themselves, they dig really deeply, they come up through their creative process, they come up with ideas that are a lot more, a lot sharper, a lot more reflective and critical than they typically do in a research essay. So some of the projects that students came up with, a Black student composed and sang a gospel song in dialogue with Joe Seeley's Africville Suite, right? But from her kind of experience and perspective. And the writing is always sharp on these too, right? It gives students something to hang on to. An Indigenous student created a storyboard and music excerpt for a video game exploring Canada through his Anishinaabe perspective. That was an intensive project that also meant co-opting his sister's talents as a graphic artist. And so that collaborative work happens on these projects sometimes in unexpected ways. And the white student who had the revelation about, the Tragically Hip did a podcast reflecting on whiteness in Canadian music, which I thought was really, he evidently found to be a useful thing to do. So the bottom line in my very small contribution to this roundtable today is really about writing, because honestly, I used to think that one of my most important jobs as a professor and one of my most important gifts I could give to students was to mentor students in academic writing. I cared deeply about it. I've done it my entire career. I've got a couple of former and current graduate students in this audience who probably are shaking their heads right now because of the kinds of comments and that I put on writing. So I care about it, and I know that professionalization of particularly graduate students is really important too. But I've really come to question this fetish on academic writing that I have, because all too often it means policing student writing and judging students based on their ability to express themselves through certain academic protocols. And, writing issues and aptitudes cut across all kinds of student positionalities. But if I consider academic writing as a tool of white supremacy, then I become completely disoriented. I need to relearn how to read and how to write. So my current ongoing self-discipline is to read through the writing for the heart of the matter. And I don't think I'm very good at it yet. And one of my ongoing processes is to learn how to mentor writing differently. And that's it. I'll pass the torch to Emily.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was so beautiful and provocative, and indeed so much to chew on and sit with. Thank you also to Hadi and Amira, and also to all the panelists. Sorry, already said that today and yesterday, and also to the organizers. I am rambling because I'm a little overwhelmed with how much I feel with all of the inspirations, but so I will stop rambling. That is, I'm tuning in today. Also, I have a screenshot to share. Okay, so this, and I promise that that we didn't coordinate this. Which means it's in the air or something like that. Okay, can you see? Oh my God, okay, hold on.
I want to belong to that lab.
Okay, hopefully this works. I'm tuning in today from the ancestral lands of the Shakori, Ino, and Tuscarora people. And for those of you who are listening and not watching, I am an Asian presenting human with short hair, and my Zoom background is a bleak institutional office. So my presentation today consists of 3 parts. In the first part, I will very briefly sketch out some preliminary thoughts on what anti-racist pedagogy might look like in my particular teaching context, and what I secretly hope students will walk away from my classes with, beyond the content and the skills that are outlined on my syllabi. In the second and third parts, I will share activities and strategies I developed for 1, an undergraduate class, and 2, a graduate seminar, respectively, and sort of briefly reflect on what worked and what didn't. I teach in a music department that is part of a College of Arts and Science in a private university in the US South. Only about 1/5 to 1/4 of the students in my classes have been music majors or minors. And this is mostly because my classes are almost always cross-listed with cultural anthropology, gender and sexuality studies, and also often Asian American and diaspora studies. But actually a lot of them are like computer science majors and statistics, anyways, so the fact that many of them have had some Western art music experience, I think, is more of a side effect of my institution's lack of economic diversity rather than students' career aspirations or trajectories. In general, I would say the students are curious, highly conscientious, and genuinely want to be good people and do good things. They tend to be familiar with the liberal multiculturalist discourse, which, coupled with an aversion to get things wrong, can sometimes mean they're really invested in what I would call musical exceptionalism, the belief that music could be a kind of panacea to all social ills, and 2, a politics of identity that performatively overcompensate by representation. So I go into detail here because I think the specifics of who the students are really do matter a lot, or at least in how I think about teaching, as essentially at its core a relational practice. So for a different group of students and in a different institutional or curricular context, I would do things quite differently. And I'm indebted here to a lot of thinkers, but I would just, I'm happy to share later. So for me, anti-racist pedagogy in this particular context means showing and not always telling students how race as a system of power hierarchy designed to benefit some on the backs of others, and race is coeval with capitalism's principle of accumulation by dispossession. So I want to show them how race operates in how we listen to music, how we think about sound, and how we talk about our oral lives with one another. Race is, of course, never without its bedfellows, gender, sex, class, ability, all of which are systems, not identities, and all in tandem with coloniality. This is to say, I start with an intersectional anti-essentialist approach. And my secret hope is for students to want more than culture or identity as explanations for why people live such different lives and why different challenges, with such different challenges and dreams, and experience the world in so many different ways. My goal is for students to leave my classes with a little bit more curiosity about the world and a few critical concepts that help them explore. I experimented with some of these practices this semester in an undergraduate course called Popular Music of Asia and Asian America. The course is actually a little bit too broad to teach. I found it very unwieldy, but I insisted on teaching Asia and Asian America together so as to show their mutual constitution in global circulation, so that I can introduce the possibility that there isn't a musical proxy for a stable transhistorical Asianness. So with a promise that it's all related to K-pop, and I finally fulfilled that promise last week. I started a course with Sino-Western encounter in the 19th century, and more specifically, was a story of how one simple tune was one heard by the ears of European diplomats as musical manifestation of a people, i.e. a folk song. And this tune was recorded in a sense, or rather transcribed into a music box that was gifted to what today's dominant Western art music historiography would describe as a composer by the name of Giacomo Puccini, and how the tune makes its way into his infamously Orientalist opera Turandot, that continues to be staged today, including in China. And how the tune was then mobilized in early 20th century by newly emerged Republican nationalist government in China as a sonic testament to the fact that there is a folk, a people needing to be governed, which is how the tune became one of the most widespread Chinese folk songs known as the Jasmine Flower. Here on the bottom right, you can see an image of Celine Dion singing it on the Chinese New Year's gala. So as I tell this story, at each step, I ask students to imagine what it would be like for them if any of their favorite songs or the songs that they hum in the I don't know, as they walk to class, become a folk song that somehow is supposed to carry the weight of representation of a whole group of people. This activity is scaffolded into a series of discussion prompts that also ask them to speculate on how, for instance, how hymns and musical instruments brought by Protestant missionaries may have shaped Chinese orality and subsequently what we might describe today as Chinese music. I'm not a historian, and I try to be very explicit in class about what I did and did not know, or what I was able to find out or not. In many ways, I learned with them in this process. But the point of the exercise is not to teach a history, but rather to instill a kind of historical empathy and an openness to imagine counter histories. Throughout the semester, we did this exercise many times for many different case studies, and I would summarize the exercise as tracing one sound across different social, political, and historical contexts, and two, speculating on how this one sound is heard in each context by a range of different listeners with different agendas. And three, examine how the sound takes on meaning and is mobilized for political ends. And each time I give students as much contextualizing information as I can find, and we talk through how musical meanings are structured by variously historically situated listening actors, including ourselves. The ways we listen in the classroom is not free of all of the forces that we're discussing. This isn't always easy or clear, and I'm not always successful in finding that sweet spot between giving them the graspable framing information, the who and what, and asking them to take a leap of faith and make an educated guess about the how and the why. Sometimes I have to coax them out of their comfort zone by staging a competition for the most outrageous answers. And we've developed an inside joke by the end of the semester for a jar of organic blueberries that's to be awarded to the most courageous theorists in the class. And I ended up covering a lot less material than I had planned. And sometimes I realized in the middle of a discussion that students actually didn't have the language to describe the sounds that they were hearing. And so I had to improvise by asking them to graph or to use metaphors to draw. And sometimes I do recourse to Western art music theory and tell them, okay, fine, the word you've been searching for is pentatonic scale. And I try to frame it as one of the many possible ways to talk about that sonic quality, but the framing doesn't always stick. But so centering the course essentially on the multiplicity of listening positionalities that has shaped the musical sounds brought up a wide range of issues and allowed us to talk about a lot of different things. So for instance, when we listen to enka, for instance, we discussed not only enka's significance to post-war Japan, but also how Japanese colonialism produced enka-like genres in Taiwan and in Korea. We also examined racial mimicry using the early works of Enka diva Misora Hibari as a case study, and consider how music circulates along the path of coloniality while trafficking racial ideologies and racist stereotypes. In other words, how racism travels and how it works in different contexts. As the semester progresses, I also introduce activities that gradually shift the framing work onto the students. I ask them questions like, why is indie metal pop so popular in East Asia? And I give them two plausible hypotheses. Students then spend class time working in small groups, researching and debating, so as to collectively decide which hypothesis is more compelling to them, or if they wanted to come up with a third on their own. And with each new case study, I also ask students to listen and write down their first impressions, describing what they hear. And we come back to these written first impressions after we have studied the context, the politics, and we talk about what has shaped those first impressions, what has shaped the words that how do they come up with the decisions to describe some sounds as nasally and shrill and others as beautiful and resonant, for instance. And through case studies on Asian American activists and feminist musicians, the Yellow Pearl, the Linda Lindas, the Madam Gandhi, the Nodo Boys, and on K-pop and Chinese hip-hop and fandom activism and more, we also address the gendered and eroticized processes of Asian racialization in the US and Canadian context, and interrogated the model minority myth. All of this, at the end of the day, though, is really just an effort from me to show them how race is a system that racism can exist in our very own ears. And the ways to be an anti-racist listener is to pause and reflect on our own habits of listening. And so in a similar vein, but totally different register, this semester, I also gave the excellent people in my graduate seminar an assignment that I call the Laboratory of Disorientation. And this seminar is called Sounding Disorientations, Music and Its Others. And it draws together sound studies with queer of color critique, amounting ultimately to an interrogation of acoustemologies of difference. So I will post a screenshot of the assignment here. But essentially, I asked seminar participants to keep a journal in whatever format they want. And this had ranged from a private Instagram account. I think one person tried a TikTok at one point, to a box, literally a box of tapes or voice memos on their phones, and old school notebook. And so they keep a journal reflecting on how they work and their own intellectual labor, and to regularly review the journal to see if any patterns emerge. And they can keep the journal as private as they want. I asked them to never submit it to me. The work happens when we discuss the practice of this self-reflexive practice. And I did the exercise with them too. So I myself kept the journal right here. My aim was to instill a willingness to pause and reflect on habits of not only listening, but also habits of thinking and theorizing and communicating about sound. At the beginning of each class for the whole semester, we spent about 20 minutes or so talking about things that came up for them in the laboratory of disorientations. And I actually really didn't know what would come up. So I was quite terrified a lot of the times, not gonna lie. But this space actually allowed us to talk about very practical work habits. Like don't read an academic book like it's a novel. Time and energy management, techniques for organizing one's writing process, like very kind of technical side of things, all the way to doubt, insecurity, the infamous imposter syndrome that become paralyzing perfectionism, or on the flip side, discomfort with the vulnerability of writing and reading from one's own subject position, feeling confused about how hard it is to not hide behind what Jose Munoz calls the romance of negativity, or the legitimacy of continental philosophy. So over the course of the semester, these discussions gradually become a space for students collectively to critically reflect on how each seminar participant experience normative academic practices. And this is, of course, raised and gendered and classed, which dovetailed with discussions on seminar readings. This is to say that the assignment inadvertently practiced what Sarah Ahmed described as an orientation around and not toward the work of knowledge production, pointing toward the various structures of power that shape the musical thought that we are supposed to be generating in this classroom. At the end of the semester meetings, one person observed, and I think this person is brilliant in this observation, and also in general, how the lab allowed them to gradually piece together an image of what Hadi described as the genius white man from the tacit knowledge and commonsensical practices, and they started asking questions about those, about that image and about those practices. Others reported that they experimented with different modalities of writing and noticed their own and began noticing their own pleasures, delight, and playfulness in academic work. And of course, for some, this assignment felt like busy work, and that's okay too. So I'll very briefly conclude here by saying that my attempt to narrow these strategies is only possible in retrospect. In the thick of it, I often find teaching in this way frustrating, confusing, demoralizing, and terrifying. But those feelings were not reasons to stop. They merely registered, I think, the triple labor that is anti-racist, decolonial, anything. You have to first reveal and name the racist and colonial logic. Then you have to imagine something else. Then you have to try and hope maybe it will work. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I'm sure we all feel the same way. My mind is just buzzing with all kinds of great ideas and ways that we might be able to move forward with this. So thank you so much. I'll open the floor for any questions. If you'd like to use the chat, feel free. If you'd like to use the little hand raise function, feel free. But maybe I'll turn it over first to our panelists if any of you would like to respond to something that anyone else has said. So go ahead if anything comes up.
If we're waiting for folks to think, I'd love to hear from Emily how that final evaluation went when the grad students had to come to you and grade themselves.
Oh, it was fascinating. Actually, so I met with each of them for half an hour. It was very exhausting. I would not do it in one day again. But actually everybody came and most people said that they would give themselves a 7.5 out of 10. And then we kind of talk about why, and then I ask if it's okay if I give them a 10 out of 10, which was my plan all the time anyway. But I think so a lot of them discussed different things, very different things come up. Some people just thought, well, this exercise confirmed that I already know what I was doing and I'm comfortable with it and I don't want to change a thing, and that's okay. And some people I think had a space to try and articulate what hasn't been working for them. And they shared different amounts with me to their comfort. But yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question. I give everybody A's because.
Might just jump in with a question if I don't see any others in the chat. Unless Nil, did you have a question? My question, I think, is more for Amira. I guess I was thinking as you were talking about using social media and especially the in-class assignments where students are kind of doing this on the fly, and how you might set up the assignment with the class in ways that kind of avoid some of the pitfalls of essentializing some of these people and cultures that they're finding, especially if these are not, if they're not part of that group. I just wonder if you could speak to that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Megan. Thanks. That for sure happens. I see it a lot when I've actually never had a situation in a Music of South Asia, for example, class where anyone has any sense of South Asia at all, at least at my institution. That was a little different when I taught the same course at my graduate institution. But I think what ends up happening is for that particular course assignment, the Instagram photo essay, it is an assignment they have to take home and do. And so what we do is we end up workshopping. I do this for all my assignments in class. I find it's a lot easier for students to get a sense of what is expected by doing an activity that is expected first as a practice, and then being able to sit with the assignment description that's written and then be able to kind of continue these practices at home. So what we do is a bit of a workshop where I ask them to do maybe present one piece, do some Instagram, research, present one piece that comes to you and do a little bit of a free write as if you would an annotation on this particular topic. And then we workshop them in class. I have them critique each other's in sort of private first, because students are more likely to be a little more vulnerable with each other, I think, than with me sort of presiding over this. I also run into the issue about sort of being a culture bearer as the only one in the room, which I can talk about separately. I wonder if my colleagues have the same issue. But separately from that, I end up having them critique each other's and then bring them into the classroom as a larger group. And then we kind of go through and use examples to be able to say, well, what would you do to improve your piece now, having read another student's or heard from another student? So they can kind of self-calibrate a little bit. Rather than me saying, I think this one student really did a great job with this workshop and another student didn't. Of course, that's not the point here. So that's just some of the ways we do that. I also find like I do these kinds of things in my Performing Asian America class. I had students, I taught a day on Asian American fashion blogging, and they looked at like influencers who have TikTok accounts and Instagram accounts. And it was really cool to sit in the classroom and just hear all the songs that are ruined by TikTok challenges, you know, over and over again through the entire class. It was interesting to do that. And it made me realize how much I can learn from them as the target users for these platforms right now, even though I love TikTok. I'm on TikTok all the time. But I think that is just, those are just a couple thoughts I have. And I want to kind of call out something that Emily said just in her presentation on moving past just representation as a way to understand difference. I'm stuck there, honestly. I find that we're, at least on my campus, we're sort of stuck at the place where all you have to have is someone who represents something different in the room and things are fixed. But that's of course not the case, right? And so I'd love to hear from my colleagues about what they grapple with in that, and especially being someone who ends up representing and doing representational or representative work that is just the start to actually dismantling systems and structures that all of my colleagues discussed in their presentations. So I hope that answers your question, and perhaps it opens another one, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a question from Beth in the chat. She writes, I'd love to hear more about experiences of collaborative research and writing. Can we talk universities into accepting collaborative graduate theses and dissertations? Effectively, they already do so since they permit audio and video recordings as part of the dissertation submission. I also wonder what challenges of collaboration. So I wonder if any of you would like to speak to that, or anyone else in the panel, or in the room.
I've been doing a lot of this work, both in publishing and in research projects, and advocating for practice-based research as a part of our dissertations in MA and PhD programs, where that collaboration often, collaborative component often does come out, although not so much in the writing. That's, as usual, Bev, you've come up with the really provocative idea. And that, one of the challenges, of course, is doing that work across difference. In a current research project, I've set up things so that people have to grapple with difference, and we're all put into a position of feeling pretty unsettled and often quite uncomfortable, and then having to work through all of that. And the working through is the subject of the research project. It's the challenge is to set the terms so that they're fair and provide escape routes for people, and are not manipulative, and are I won't say safe and comfortable, because they're not. Often people are when they're unsettled, they're not feeling safe or comfortable. But how to manage that in that situation, and then come out the other end with something that everybody feels they have some stake in or some agency in. And I'm being pretty vague because I don't want to go into the details of the project, but I guess I'm just advocating for Hadi's idea. I think it's if somehow we could foster that kind of collaboration without the dreaded group project, how is it different from the dreaded group project? Yeah.
Gordon.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Hadi, go ahead. Why don't you respond?
Sorry. I just feel like everybody's doing it. Everybody believes in its power. In my cohort, in my institute, we have a dissertation writing course. We meet every other week. Every session we meet, we talk about one person and what they've written. This essentially turns all of our dissertations into a collaborative project, because it's like you keep hearing this one person, these 5 people in the room, you keep hearing each other think out loud. And then, of course, you're going to shape each other. Like, if you're not going to do that, why bother being in the class? You know what I mean? You go there to tell people and to hear people. But then ultimately, it doesn't happen because, of course, I mean, for me as a student, I think about doing a collaborative writing, and then I remember, oh, you know, I'm an upper year PhD student. I need to have something in my CV when I go out. Then, of course, as at the same time, instructors and supervisors also have similar concern because they also want to train us in a way to succeed in this like really, really bizarre job market that it's like only becomes more and more precarious. So it's a very tricky situation. Like I advocate for it, at the same time I also understand why it doesn't pick up. You know what I mean? It's a very it's a cyclical. It's always a cyclical move, but it's also one of those cyclical moves, I guess.
Thank you so much. Gordon, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, everyone. This is a great discussion. There's one thing that came up or came to my mind when Ellen was speaking, but the other presenters also touched on this. For example, Emily in her presentation. That's the importance of writing and sort of rethinking how we mentor students in writing. And it makes me think of editing and publishing. Hadi brought this up, I think that it was just a minute ago, talking about collaborative work and collaborative writing and then collaborative publishing. And then as the incoming editor of Music Cultures, I'm particularly interested in this because people have been talking about alternative models of peer review and sort of rethinking the peer review process. I'd like to, I don't know if Ellen, if you want to sort of weigh on this, it's a huge topic and I hesitate bringing it up, but it is increasingly on editors' radar, journals, so leading journals, our editorial boards, so on, professional societies, academic societies are talking about it with no real what to do. So I don't know, Ellen, if you wanted to, or any of the other.
Yeah, I was trying to leave a bit of space for others. I don't know that I have anything brilliant to say about that, but I know that there's some amazing projects out there, right? And much more openness to this in presses than one would have thought. I've been part of a book about the adaptive use musical instrument of Pauline Oliveros that Sherry Tucker's been shepherding with collaborative through and through with academics and non-academics and folks with disabilities and children and all kinds of stakeholders. And she has steered us through a process that where we came up against our habits and prejudices at every single turn. It was only possible because the press was willing to imagine such a book and send it out for peer review to people from the disability community, not just from academics. I think it's so important.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. It's really hard to find people to peer review to start with, and then to find you have a text, an article on whatever topic, and you need to be really careful about who you ask to assess it from a kind of anti-racism point of view, and it's a challenge. That's all I'm trying to say.
Can I jump in also? I think this is such a crucial point. I say this preparing for my third year review, which is, partway to my tenure file review. And I did write a collaborative peer-reviewed piece for a special issue that was a joint issue for two journals, the Global Performance Studies Journal and the Journal of Dramatic Theory and Criticism, both of course beyond music, but I was writing with two colleagues in theater on the journal Hamilton. And it was interesting because the process of writing that was really hard. It was really hard to collaborate, but they asked in the call that collaboration be a kind of frictive process that you end up sort of acknowledging in the resulting piece. So that's one thing, but another thing I want to just bring in is that, and maybe my colleague Emily can talk a little more about this, that, you know, it's, I'm being told that collaboration is great. And also you have to write single author stuff to be able to get tenure. And so I think that's another part of the professionalization sort of, you know, sticky situation that we're in, that we've built all these structures that end up circulating around each other. And so I hear it from Gordon, from Ellen, at the level of editing and finding peer reviewers to do this work that's going to change what is accepted into journals. And Hadi brought up the review that you did, the incredible review of looking through the last 6 years of the Journal of Ethnomusicology, our field journal. And also I think to bring in, like you said, Hadi, as well, the importance of having something out to go on the job market as an ABD. And also when in the process of the 6 years toward tenure, we are discouraged from making ourselves too collaborative to not have the viability to be standalone scholars that can stand up to the tenure review process. And I think that's just a big mess.
It's okay if I would just like to maybe follow up on what Amira said. I'm in a similar position. I am deeply pre-tenure. I'm second year on my job, and I feel that you know, in the micro decisions I make about how I spend my time and how I mean, time, like, you don't think about time management, energy management unless you have to, unless you are actually, as a human, you are radicalized into parts that are exchangeable, you know, and not radicalized in a good way, right? Like, anyways, my point is, in queer Marxism theory or like literature, there's often this idea that like sort of people are thinking about capitalism as something that tries to make a bunch of different things and different people and different characteristics interchangeable. And this forced equivalency does a certain kind of like violence, right? But that is actually fundamentally what we're talking about here. So while I think longingly toward Marxism's promise, as a pre-tenure person, I have a lot of the same sort of concerns that Amira does. And I will also share that, like, not very long ago, I wrote something together with Nadia Shana, who is also an ethnomusicologist and a dear respected colleague and dear friend of many of ours. And you know, it takes at least 3 times the amount of time to have 2 people write together, because I can't make all the decisions on my own. And that process was actually just so life-giving and wonderful. And I like it was great, but I actually decided to do it understanding that it would like never count for like, it would never count in a kind of significant way. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing this for my soul. Right. But it does mean that I have to then make up for it some other way. And yeah, I think there's a lot in the chat, so I will stop rambling.
I have a question for Hadi and Amira and Emily, and that's, you know, the impact that all this labor you're putting into your teaching has on your research time, because it's such innovative, great, careful work that you're doing. But to, you know, break new ground in all your courses requires huge amounts of extra time.
I can start by confessing, which is that I think for me, some of the things are, I have a really hard time keeping teaching and research and just, I don't know, general thinking as a person apart. And so they're all in one big, just big clump of whatever in my head all the time. And I also have weirdly taken on a coping strategy in the time of pandemic, which involves lying on the floor, reading a lot of queer of color critique. And so this is my way of saying that I mostly just roll forward. I kind of don't super think about, well, I want to be innovative. I'm just like, I don't want to teach popular music of Asia without Asian America. I don't want to teach popular music of Asian America. So classes starting in a week, here we go. And so I feel like I'm improvising a lot. So I don't have a good answer to your question.
Your virtuosity as an improviser is perhaps the answer to that question.
I would love to jump in and also say that as my dear friend Emily says as well, that it's kind of selfish too. And the reason I say that is because, so I said in my presentation, I'm my department's very first ethnomusicologist. And as you can imagine, there are very perhaps outdated or just wrong assumptions of what this discipline is, right? I think a lot of what was expected of me when I came in was teach 6 courses a year, music of the world's peoples, and you'll be doing great work, kind of, that kind of thing. And so what I ended up doing is developing all of these I developed 4 new courses in 2 years, partly because I don't want to teach music of the Renaissance. Like, I just have no desire to do that. And so as a result, I think keeping my work sort of current and constantly challenging myself to make sure that, I'm doing this work in myself, which, because I've been produced by this system that has been a system that has championed white supremacy and kind of colonist structures and all of these kinds of things, that if I don't do that work, like Emily says, my research will also suffer, my scholarly contributions, the things I have to say in the discourse will also suffer. And so I would say that is important to acknowledge the self-centeredness of this too.
Thank you. Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for this amazing panel. It's just so great to hear so many, great ideas. Yeah, this collaboration kind of brought the ideas of publishing in edited volumes as PhD candidates, for example, which is obviously not the best way to start your publication career, right? Because if we even can think of an edited volume as a collaborative academic work, and like articles collaborated around a topic of a central topic, or let's say, other than like a very large categorization of music, but maybe more detailed. Yeah, I'm working on a necropolitics related project right now, and for example, on the Turkey-centered, necropolitics-centered edited volumes kind of emerging. But for example, I'm sometimes getting invitations from those edited volumes that are imagined to put in publication, but it's always a kind of decision to make. Should I just, as a PhD candidate at least, should I just go with an edited volume, or should I just, as my first publication, should I just go with a particular journal to publish my first article or my second article? Even at that level, I guess the collaboration, in the sense of maybe interdisciplinary collaboration, is not happening as well. And also, I don't know, like I think obviously I have some questions about your ideas about like publishing in edited volumes as a form of collaboration, let's say. I would like to hear if any of my colleagues here have something to say about it.
Hi, Neil. You can talk to me anytime, but I'll but I'll share I'll share with everybody.
Thank you, Farzi.
Sure, everyone. um, I didn't know until I got to read the reviews of my tenure file that someone who anonymously reviewed me thought that publishing in a journal in an edited volume before I had tenure was a brave but wise decision. It was something like that, because it prioritized, in their view, generously, the kinds of relationships that could form as a result of that, which then could build kinds of alliances and connections later on. There's different ways of thinking about the investment, academic research as investment in your future potential and future connections. And I know this is in some ways off topic of anti-racism, but making strategic and soul feeding choices about who you want to be in conversation with and who you want to listen to and who you want to be associated with is really great. And an edited volume does give you a little bit of that opportunity, as long as the editor is transparent. I've also had the experience where the editor won't tell me who else is in the volume, and you're like, what's going on? Or it takes like years to come out and whatever, there's all those issues as well. So that, but in terms of collaboration, I think there is something to what you're saying that can also happen with special issues, conference panels, which you already have lots of experience with, and so on. But kind of intentional, maybe thinking to expand your idea and out to what we're talking about, intentional pairings, being intentional about the kinds of communities that you choose to engage with and share with and create, because you're also often creating those as you create a panel or a set of conversations, or what we have here, which is so great. And I'm learning so much. Goodbye.
Can I, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ellen.
No, go ahead, Amira.
I just, thank you so much for that, Farzi, and what a reveal for what this person said on your tenure review file, which is pretty amazing. In response to Neil's question, I finished grad school in 2019, and so I did get my job as an ABD candidate, and I did have, honestly, I didn't really seek to do this, but I had a journal and an edited volume, 2 edited volume chapters out on my CV, but it wasn't by chasing it at all, because I just happened to be in these kind of spaces, actually these very spaces, CSTM and conference panels, and sort of people who said, oh, I'd love to you to contribute this. And the advice I got from my mentors, and I had a wonderful set of mentors, still do, from my graduate program, and was that edited volumes are a nice way to be able to go to a part of the research that won't necessarily take all the time needed to make that journal manuscript, because they're usually shorter. And so I just treated them that way. And it really was quite fulfilling to just like push something out there. That said, now that I'm in my tenure track position, I've been told, like, stop, just do not take one request with an edited volume. I did accept 2 recently, but again, I think what Farzi says is so true, that it's because the work is fulfilling. And one is actually a book on something that I'd like to write on, which is sort of what is expected by the specifically performing ethnomusicologist, if other folks have that experience, and sort of being then in a kind of racialized costume and sort of thinking through costuming and dance studies and that kind of thing. And so it means when something like means a lot to me and I can take a chunk out of the discourse that may not necessarily have to go through peer review, but perhaps that's something that my other colleagues who are senior and sitting on tenure committees might dissuade from. So I'd love to hear about that too. But I will say, as a grad student, I was told, take any opportunity to publish just because it's something that you can put out there.
I think context matters a lot because these things are evaluated very differently in different systems. I think in the US in general, it's more brutal than it is in Canada, and it obviously varies in Canadian institutions. In my institution, there's no difference made between a chapter in an edited collection or a peer-reviewed article, as long as they're both peer-reviewed. One looks at the venue, the quality of the work, but you know, these things are not totally generalized. What I was going to mention was just like further complicating things and picking up on what Farzi said about the work you do with your research. You know, what happens when we start to really think of doing participant action research and the people we're collaborating with are not simply our interlocutors in the field and then we go and do the writing, but they're people that we want to invite into the writing or invite into the publication in some way that's meaningful to them. Because it's not really, in my experience, the case that people want to do the work I want to do, like their investments are different, but how to honor the fact that their work is instrumental to the research. It's not just the subject of the research. That's something that I think about quite a lot.
Go ahead, Beth.
Thanks for all this. I feel like maybe I derailed some of the other subjects that you would do, but another thing that interests me, I think, is how the creativity that you're all putting into your course designs, your teaching, but also your research methodologies that are crossing performance and words and venues for words. I mean, whether they're online or published books. It's such a complicated kind of world that you are reinventing so beautifully and so creatively. And I guess I'm curious about whether you get recognition for that kind of creativity in your work in any way, whether it's, you know, the academic stream or some sort of public recognition, or is it quite simply that you realize you're changing the lives of your wonderful young students?
I wanted to just put a resource into the mix. It's not necessarily an answer to the question. Thank you for the question, Beverly, but there's one journal called Syllabus, the journal, and I think Neil might have left, but this is a really great possibility for those who are doing, my colleagues are doing amazing things in their syllabi, that you can get a nice peer-reviewed publication in a journal, Syllabus the journal. I think it's like syllabusthejournal.com or something like that. That might be something that you can sort of double down on these efforts to get professional recognition for files and for job market purposes. I have not submitted. I did have a colleague who submitted, my colleague in African American Studies, who submitted something on a course that she's writing on like racialized popular cultures in the construction of African America. And she had a really successful experience. And the, oh, sorry, you're here. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, take a look at that. See if it would be useful, because we're already doing this work, like Beverly said, and maybe this is a way that we can kind of go back to the pot and not have to necessarily reinvent things, but get recognition that we are in a system where that does matter.
Can I just add that, and I'm not sure, I mean, I'm conscious always how things change over time, but I've always had this weird, undisciplined combination of performance and community work and, you know, scholarly research. And one of the things I've kind of figured out early on was I had to explain my CV. So I just don't take for granted that anybody will understand why I published in a particular venue or what I was doing when I collaborated on a thing. So I make it really explicit. I connect the dots and explain how everything fits into my research profile. And that, you know, it helps, I think, a little bit.
Can I just jump in on that point and in just some degree responding to what Bev said? Just finishing a deanly role. I mean, I've seen, like, not a million, but hundreds of PGR files that like renewal or tenure or promotion to full professor. And I think Alan's point about presenting yourself well and thoroughly and thoughtfully. I mean, you folks are such really engaged and innovative thinkers. Take the time when you're preparing your tenure file, put that thinking into that. Some of the best PTR files are the ones that do that. And in our area, it helps the people who are reading them understand. Otherwise, reading a CV, they're just going to say, well, that's all collaborative work. Well, what does that mean? Actually, it's really rich. It's hugely rich. And you have to educate the assessors. It's worth the effort. I always advise faculty members to do that. And on the other end of it, we need to sort of decolonize the evaluators, like the deans. And there needs to be, I find, like, I worked in a team of like 6 deans and 5 were scientists. So I was constantly trying to make a case. And it's less sort of lonely for the humanities and the arts now, but it's really important that review teams are balanced and really sensitized to changes, anti-racism, and decolonization. It sort of links back to the peer review. Also, the teaching point, the amount of time that goes into this amazing work needs to be valued. That needs to be explained. And sometimes, like within the Emily's course, that's really hard to put that across in a CV, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I think that's exciting and needs to be rewarded. Not just good work, but it needs to count, is what I'm trying to say.
Emily, did you want to respond? I'm aware that we're well over time, but Emily, do you want to have the last response here?
I do. I want to share with you all this graph that the grad students drew on the whiteboard during the week that we read literature on queer diaspora. And it's not actually comprehensible here, but the idea here, I think, was that recognition can come from a lot of different directions. And I think personally, but I also wonder if this, I think I'm not alone in this, that, you know, you get recognition, you can impression manage in certain kind of way, and and we all have to subject ourselves to the racist colonialist structure that tries to extract labor out of us in some situations strategically and at times, but also at the same time, I think it's also okay to be open to recognitions from not just the structure, but other subjects within the structure, the mutual recognitions that, and so in this case, it will, in the context of teaching, you know, it's when a grad student in my seminar could draw a diagram to show sort of how minority coalition can sort of become a life-giving source. That's really rewarding to me. That's a form of recognition. Actually, even when they catch the weird puns I make on the syllabus was organized into, you know, to orient, the orient, to other, the other, and then to the otherwise, or like oriented to the otherwise, or something like that. Anyways, my point is, when, like, it doesn't only have to be, I mean, it has to be a certain amount of people evaluating me and reviewing me, seeing my labor, but also when students see my labor and see the care that I put into this work, that's also really rewarding. And also, like I took some students out to boba tea yesterday because they were the only ones who showed up before break, and they were like sitting there in the boba tea joint and saying things like, I used to think J-pop and K-pop would sound totally different, and now I realize it's all about political context. And I was just like, okay, my work is done, you know. So I feel like there are many different kinds of recognition, and I don't know, maybe it's kind of like a food and like metaphor, right? Like you want a balanced plate of a bit of everything. Like you don't just want protein. I will stop talking. Okay.
That seems like an incredibly positive note to end on. Thank you so much, everyone, for your generosity of time and just for sharing in very, very rich and personal ways your experiences. So I think we all took a lot out of this this roundtable. Thank you so much. And great to see you all. And I hope we can all continue this conversation in person sometime very soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Megan, for your able cheering.
Yes. Thanks, Megan and Toshio and everybody.
Great.
Thanks for
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Toshio, to my fellow presenters.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Do
you.
we need to stay on for any reason?
No, great to see you. Thank you so much.
You too.
Bye, Hadi.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Hadi.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Toshio. See you
Okay.
soon.
Yep, thanks. See you soon.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.